Alright, so let's have a look at the Vesica Pisces to begin with, and the focus of this video will be on well, weights and measures, but as it goes through to the harmonic numbers as they're referred to. Always beginning with the Vesica, two circles, the center of the second on the edge of the first. It's pretty much the basic fundamental construction in so much of Euclidean geometry, but also what's referred to in sacred geometry, and those two are really deeply connected, many aspects, but that's something else for the moment. But here we see the harmonic numbers, 2 to the first, 2 to the second, 2 to the third, 3 to the first, 3 to the second, 3 to the third. They just expand that way, and were very cool because they will connect with geometry, measurement systems, but especially worth looking at first is the concept of time and the compass. It's about when you are, and it's about where you are going, your direction. And there's some interesting philosophical questions, but especially in regards to navigation. And you look at the harmonic numbers, what do they incorporate? Well, pretty much not the whole, but a very large part of the core principles of Hermeticism. Hermes, god of weights and measures, or Thoth, god of weights and measures. For instance, 24 hours a day, the minutes per day, seconds per day, seconds per hour. They're all here in these harmonic numbers, and this series of this chart is it's so much loaded in, so much information is loaded in there, and especially my favorite area or approach to this whole thing is through weights and measures. So we can measure time, but we also measure degrees in the 360-degree compass. So 360 degrees, each degree is divided into 60 minutes, each minute is divided into 60 seconds. So very similar to the clock, but we also incorporate some other numbers. For instance, 360 degrees is 21,600 minutes of the compass, and that's 1,296,000 seconds of the compass. So through time and direction, the clock and the compass, as a beginning point, that's one of the powers, one of the beauties in this harmonic number series. So time and the compass, when and which direction you are headed, beautifully represented by that equinoctial portable sundial. But also in the Vesica, so we have this rhombus for the degrees from coming back to the compass. The breakdown of, well, the Vesica is very much about time, the way that degrees convert over, but there's also quite a bit of astronomical knowledge, size of sun, earth and moon especially. But so here we see the numbers chart, Pythagorean tuning, because there are really strong connections as well to Pythagorean knowledge, but especially music theory as it still applies now. In the Vesica, it's a 2 to 3 ratio. So we have C 256, G 192, D 288. Each one of these numbers is just core in sacred architecture from the ancient times up until the modern times as well. A 432, E 324, and to B 486. And so just by this chart alone you start to see how it appears out, but it's also worth noting that the ratio between each note is at a 3 to 2, 2 to 3 ratio. That's very important. Anyone familiar with especially music theory, or how this will also apply to the Vesica Pisces, which is a 2 to 3 ratio. 3 feet equals 2 cubits. There's so many other connections as well in regards to weights and measures, but we see this ratio of the Vesica describes a perfect fifth as well, Pythagorean tuning scales there, which is very nice. So we've already seen, well, geometry, now we'll incorporate music. So, but even the numbers themselves in the harmonic number chart, the top left corner there, 2 and 3, that's the fundamental ratio from here, from the Vesica Pisces. But also worth noting, so if you divide up, you break up the square as well. So the whole Vesica is 2 to 3, but because of the construction lines and built into there is also this 4 to 3, 2 to 3 ratio. And 4 to 3, well, that's very musical as well, because 3 to 4 is the perfect fourth, 2 to 3 is the perfect fifth. Is that Alleluia song, original by Leonard Cohen. It goes like this: for fourth, for fifth. It's it really, it's not an invention. This is still very important in music theory. So the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth as well is in the Vesica. The Vesica, from there we can build up the harmonic series, which has 256, 192, 288, 432, and these very important numbers. And well, Pythagorean hammers and the tetractys as well. There you can see I've done a few videos on it in the past, but Pythagorean hammers and how music theory, at least according to the standard version of history, has to do with Pythagoras coming upon these blacksmiths working the iron, the metal, and their hammers just happen to be at those ratios, and that's how music theory emerged. But in that same construction, so that 4 to 3 rectangle, it also creates a 3, 4, 5 triangle simply by doing the diagonal. And well, how is that important to Pythagorean tuning, but all the greater Pythagorean system of knowledge? Because we have Pythagorean theorem: a squared plus b squared equals c squared, 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. This 3, 4, 5 triangle is the first of the Pythagorean triplets. It's also very, very important in esoteric tradition, the craft guilds, the stonemasons, cathedral builders, going back to ancient Egypt as well. It was just a fundamental of this whole field. Well, now throughout geometry, whether it's squares, triangles, pentagrams, pentagons, hexagons, well, because of a 360-degree compass, the way it breaks down, you will find that each, well, especially the pentagon and the hexagon, how they come back to, again, this very lovely, very simple set of numbers. It's just about 2 to the first, 2 to the second, and multiply that by 3 to the first, 3 to the second. But ancient weight systems and how they convert to the supposed modern English grains. Well, if you do a study of the history of, for instance, 108 grain coins, and how, well, for instance, there you can see 108 goes back quite some time. There's actually an unbroken chain going back to ancient times, crossing cultures. But for instance, these Greco-Roman weights and the grains and how they happen to convert, well, it's just a ABC 1, 2, 3. It's always they're all there, and just a beautiful system. The harmonic numbers, weights and measures, especially the quadrivium, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. But even up to such as apothecaries' weights. Now, apothecary was basically a pharmacist, and different trades had their own weight systems, but that also will correspond to the 480 grains of a troy ounce. That's how we measure gold, especially if you see the gold price. Now, Platonic solids, so three-dimensional geometry. Also, and there's only 5 Platonic solids, and they're all there described in the harmonic numbers. Now, it's also, this might, to the Mediterranean area. However, it does cross time, crosses cultures, and so, for instance, the Yugas and Eastern tradition. What numbers do they use? Well, harmonic numbers over and over and over again. So the amount of years in each of the yugas, the sort of the entry, the middle, and the exit period of each yuga, but even how the divine years, the count there, also just happens to correspond and be described there. But that's a coincidence. But so did the Mayans. They had this same system as well, and they were working on base 20. So it doesn't quite cross over. But it seems to be something to this, unless it's of course all coincidence. But of course the Vesica, the 360-degree compass, even how that breaks down, again showed that earlier, it's all in there. Now those particular numbers will also bring us to some very lovely astronomical connections. And so, for instance, 864, 6912, 2160, the Plato's lambda, all these other things. But for instance, using ancient systems of weights and measure, which bring us harmonic numbers across time, across cultures, across these very important ancient structures. The most important of them being, well, the stone circles, pyramids, temples. They just repeat it all the time. Sun, Earth, and moon numbers being in there, and how our supposedly allegedly modern system just happens to correspond to the ancient systems at exactly the point where these numbers are repeated. If you convert from one to another, you're always going to get a conversion. That's obvious, but that they fall on these particular points is very important. Now, even these particular numbers, which are based on the geometry there, so on the left-hand side, circles, the triangle, the six-sided, the Star of David, but then the 12-sided star, 24-pointed star. Well, using Bode's law, this even defines the distances from of each of the planets to the Sun. And it's interesting that Bode's law was not retrofitted, so to speak. He actually, using this method, they actually predicted planets such as Ceres and Uranus, and well, predicted not only that they would be there, but also where they would be, as in relation from their distance to the Sun. And of course, this has nice direct applications straight back over to the harmonics. It's also very convenient that precession, the great year, the precession of the equinoxes, that the, well, 72 years per degree of precession, that might be arbitrary because we're working on a 360-degree compass, but the Platonic season, the Platonic month, and the great year itself, within 99.9%, there's a whole other bunch of other considerations to be put in there, but it's pretty much spot on to the modern values and even their change. But anyway, we see precessional knowledge, and these are, of course, are mentioned in the past and embedded in ancient architecture through units of weights and measure. Thoth, Hermes, gods of weights and measure, gods of knowledge, gods of engineering and science. Of course, this all might be some quirk of superstitious ancient times, or a coincidence. However, it just happens to work out that if you're watching this on a monitor, or on a screen, what's the screen resolutions? What are the proportions? What do they come out? They're harmonic numbers. In the infinite sea of numbers, this would not happen. But even still to this day, you can see some examples of various screen file types, and they're, every single one of them, it comes back to these particular harmonic numbers, and that's one of the powers of them, because they have so many divisors, for instance, and this lovely set of ratios, as we, for instance, in the musical scales as well. But if this is not a relic of the past, the people who are regulating weights and measures, including the modern electronics, for instance, here in Australia, we have on the AM dial, also FM 108, but AM dial is set up here. Everything about our place is built around this. But of course, even so, the old television screens were at 4 to 3, and the new screens are at 16 to 9. It's the same number, but it's just working on these harmonics. So the squares and the cubes, and so there we get another. So literally, it's inbuilt in still our electronic age, information age. What are the file types, sizes they're using? What is the hardware that we're using? It's all harmonic. It's ancient, and it forms an unbroken line. Crosses time, crosses cultures. It's built on geometry, the quadrivium geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. And we've seen, well, plenty of examples here. There are a lot more, but really is something worth looking into. So it's not just that our past is holds important information. It's very still relevant, but it's relevant because even the people who decide these, who decides the standard monitor size. Every company doesn't make their own. They come to an agreement on the 16 by 9, as they had the 4 by 3 earlier to that. File sizes need to be standardized. All these systems of standardization of weights and measures, and not just like in the literal what you can hold in your hand, but here we see computer age still there, hasn't gone away, and again crosses time, crosses cultures, and the fundamental building blocks of these goes back to, well, geometry and Hermeticism. We're measuring time, measuring the compass, and of course even weights themselves. It just is, and probably always will be, or at least it should be. And with that, hope you enjoy.